shall not pass 121. Have you ever felt a profound urge to do something? And if you didn't do it, then it would cause you great pain and immense distress? This exact thing has been happening to me. It was this profound feeling in the pit of my stomach, in the deep recesses of my subconscious. It surged through me like electricity through a plug socket, and it was a feeling that I did not recognize. Do you want to know what it was? It's bizarre, really. I feel really foolish for even admitting it. It's something that's been filling me in like paint on a blank canvas. And I have been fighting the urge to comply, or trying to, anyway. Every day I've been waking up, walking up to my window and staring at this unassuming spot on the grass in my garden, wanting so desperately to dig it up. Every day the feeling grew stronger, more powerful, and I didn't know how long I could hold off. I knew there was something awful underneath that earth, something that I didn't want to find. But this feeling, I could not shake it. It may seem trivial to you, and maybe you're thinking that it isn't a big deal. Why not just dig the hole? What's the worst that can happen? Well, sometimes the worst can and does happen. This deep, cavernous yearning has been gnawing at me, clawing at me like vultures at a corpse, and I could feel my hands that were almost not my own, grip the shovel. Just dig. So, I caved. I started, and I haven't been able to stop. Keep on digging. The deeper I got, the more overwhelming the feeling became. Dig. 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 I think I was digging for around 5 days. I couldn't say. Time was but a vague concept that had become entirely alien to me. I just kept going, digging deeper and deeper until I hit something. Something hard. I clawed at the earth. My fingernails cracked and bled. I clawed until I couldn't feel the throbbing pain in my fingers. Then I happened to stumble upon something I didn't expect. Underneath the earth was a doorknob and a door. I stared at it for the longest time, when something happened that chilled my blood and froze my quivering heart. Something on the other side knocked. And whispered, "Welcome." My last time babysitting. I checked my watch as I walked up to the door. 10 minutes late. I had been babysitting for them for 6 months. I was sure they wouldn't mind. Mr. Lopez answered the door. "Hey, I'm sorry I'm late. I I started to say, but stopped when I saw him. His face was soaked with sweat and he looked slightly agitated.
No problem. No problem at all,"
he said, ushering me inside. In the kitchen, there was only a single light on above the table. At it, Mrs. Lopez was writing something feverishly on a slip of paper. "I'll be right back. I have to say goodbye to Denise." Denise was their 1-year-old daughter, who I had been watching for them. She disappeared into the darkness of the hallway, heading up the stairs. "So, what movie are you seeing tonight?" I asked, setting my bag down on the table. The pad of paper had holes punctured through it, as if Mrs. Lopez had been pressing the pen down hard.
I don't know. I guess we'll decide when we get there."
Mr. Lopez was shifting from foot to foot, looking more worried by the minute. I noticed a pretty sizable cut on his right cheek, dribbled with dried blood. "Are you okay, Mr. Lopez?" I asked. But before he could answer, I heard Mrs. Lopez returning from upstairs. We should get going. Goodbye, Katie," she said, pulling me into a hug. She tightened her grip for a moment, and I could have sworn I heard a soft sob. "Thank you for everything," she said, with great difficulty. She began to say something else, but her husband grabbed her and dragged her out the door. Before he closed it, he gave me a mournful, almost apologetic look. Then he closed it, and I was alone in the dark house. I thought about going out and talking to them more, or maybe even just leaving, but in the end I decided to stay. Not turning on the lights so as to not startle up Denise, I climbed the stairs in the dark and headed into her room. I approached the crib and was about to lift her up when I saw a note laying on top of the blankets. I read it by the streetlight that glared feebly through the window. "Katie, I'm so sorry. He broke in while we were getting ready. He said he was going to kill us, do horrible things to Denise. He asked if anyone knew about us, and we told him about you. It's an exchange. I'm so sorry. I hope that God will forgive me one day." Looking out the window, I saw them pulling out of the driveway. They were crying. Perched in Mrs. Lopez's lap was Denise. Behind me, in the darkness, the door creaked open. Cuttlefish by Traz O. The man was tired and alone. He was the last of his group, and as far as he knew, his species. He was realistic about his life expectancy, but had the habit of survival. He foraged through ruined buildings, moving slowly, frequently stopping to listen. The naked girl was too clean, too attractive, too unlikely to exist in this post-invasion world. She could only be bait. Her leg appeared to be pinned under collapsed ceiling rubble. She was wide-eyed and terrified. "Oh, thank God. Can you get me out?" He stopped moving and sniffed the air. expecting human spore. Cephalopods didn't really have a detectable scent. He smelled dust and mold, and himself, but nothing else. Not even the girl. No sign of a trap, because he'd be able to smell any sufficiently large group of people to man a trap, and the invader-modified mutants never worked with humans. Confusing. Unless the girl was really stuck as she appeared to be. The man remained still and considered circumstances. He looked at the girl again, and it seemed that she shook her head very slightly. There was something wrong here. The hair stood up on the back of his neck. He retreated a slow, measured step and quietly drew his katana-shaped sword, a collectible he had looted from an abandoned house in the suburbs. It was a cheap knockoff made from crap steel that wouldn't hold an edge. With frequent sharpening, it was just barely sufficient for slicing mollusks. The guns he carried were for dealing with humans. Half a dozen chunks of concrete rubble flickered, and it was suddenly obvious they had been cuttlefish the whole time. The girl screamed and they leapt, flashing colors and ripples that were intended to dazzle his senses and confuse his mind. He sliced and diced, carving pieces from his attackers. Several were able to get their arms on his limbs and torso, but the man was wearing paper armor made from old magazines. The suckers could attach to the outer sheets, but unless they wrapped all the way around, he could jerk them off at the expense of a few pages. One cuttlefish grabbed his forearm and took a divot from the fleshy part of his palm with its beak before he shook it off. Dismembered arms, still fighting, managed to attach to his face and scalp and draw blood. But they were more annoyance than dire threat. A couple of piles of dirt turned into octopuses and scurried towards his feet. He sliced one open, but the other was able to wrap arms around his left knee and began to squeeze and twist. The man felt a ligament tear as his knee torqued, and began desperately hacking at his assailant until he finally cut its mantle in two. An octopus is hard to kill with its 3 hearts and 9 brains, but cut into pieces, it fights with less coordination. The man staggered but kept moving and swinging his sword. The girl screamed,
"Behind you!"
and he spun on his good leg. A colossal squid was hanging from the ceiling with 8 arms and reaching for him with 8-meter feeding tentacles. He chopped one of the tentacles off, but the other wrapped around his waist and planted hooks that extended through paper and pierced his skin. The man howled in pain and drew a handgun, firing shot after shot into where he perceived its giant eye to be. The hooks loosened a bit, and gasping and panting, he chopped at the tentacle, finally pulling it free along with chunks of his own flesh. The squid pulled itself through a hole in the ceiling, trailing severed limbs that spilled gouts of blue blood. He took a couple of clumsy steps, blood dripping from his scalp and face, and pouring down his legs. He looked for more threats, but apart from writhing arm sections, there weren't any enemies left. Suddenly dizzy, he sat down hard. He wanted to reach the girl before losing consciousness, in case they came back while he was out, and crawled toward her while he could.
He woke up, an indeterminate time later, lying against a dusty wall. He wasn't wearing his paper or pants, though he still had his underwear and shirt on. The rags he used to secure the armor were tied around his knee, and someone had made an attempt to clean off some of the blood he had been covered in. The girl was wearing his other shirt like a poncho and sitting cross-legged with her back to him, cooking pieces of octopus and cuttlefish on sticks over a small fire. He could see her leg that had been pinned was bruised and scraped bloody, presumably from pulling it out in desperation once the attack had begun. She had 2 of his handguns in shirt pockets. The man, quietly, drew a dagger from the sheath between his shoulders and lunged forward, putting an arm around her and the blade to her neck. She froze and said, "Calm down, mister. I borrowed your guns so we'd be safe while you were out. You take them back now, okay?" He didn't say anything. "Look, mister, if I wanted to hurt you, I could have done it before you woke up." Keeping his arm around her chest and the knife in his hands, he retrieved his firearms, felt down her body until he was sure she didn't have any other weapons in her possession. Then he released her and leaned back against the wall. "Can I turn around now?" The man grunted and pushed her with a foot. She turned around slowly and met his gaze. "Want your shirt back?" He stared at her until she became uncomfortable. "What? You don't talk?" When he did speak, his voice was a rough growl. He had to clear his throat and swallow to be understood. "Used to. Been a long time since I had anyone to talk to." His throat was dry and his lips stuck together in the corners. He looked around for his water bottle. Moving slowly, she reached to her side and picked it up and handed it to him. It was a 1-liter soda bottle and it was full of a murky liquid, which he drank carefully. Water. He capped it and set it down, then continued staring at her in silence. "I wish you would say something. You're making me nervous. Why are you staring like that?" Eventually, he decided to answer. "You don't make sense. I'm trying to figure out where you are." She smiled slightly. "If I give you your shirt back, you'll see what I am." He shook his head in irritation. "Where did you come from? How can you be so healthy and well-fed? Where are your scars?" He held out an arm covered with sucker marks, hook lines, and healed bites. "Whoa. Why aren't you dead?" He repeated himself. "You don't make sense." She sighed and took a deep breath. "I'll try to explain." "Go ahead." She appeared to take some time to figure out where to start. "Okay. You know what these things that attacked you are, right?" "Muted cephalopods, uplifted by the invaders, given a new way of breathing so they can live on land and Intelligent so they can work together to hunt us.
She nodded. That's pretty much true. But how do you know this?
I don't. That's what people say.
For once, people are mostly right. She started to turn back to the fire, but stopped and asked permission. I think the food is ready. Can I check it? Now that she mentioned it, he could smell the cooking meat and his mouth flooded with saliva. He jerked his head in assent. She turned her back to him and did something over the fire. After a minute, she turned back with skewers of meat set on a relatively clean sheet of plywood, which she placed between them. He greedily grabbed one and started ripping octopus off the skewer with his teeth. He hadn't eaten in days. Can I? She pointed at the trencher. He grunted assent and took another stick for himself. She took one as well and began eating, almost dainty compared to the way he wolfed his down. They ate in relative silence for a while. He had finished 5 sticks of meat, and she too, before she spoke again. What do people say about why they did it? He swallowed and wondered if he should save the last few skewers for later. With his knee, he wouldn't be able to hunt for a while. If she tried to hunt, she'd never make it back.
A bunch of crap. Guesses. Maybe they didn't like us eating calamari.
She made a soft noise that he didn't recognize as laughter right away. He hadn't heard anyone laugh in so long that he couldn't remember it ever happening. What's your guess?
That they're evil bastards who want us dead. What fucking difference does it make? We're almost all dead anyway.
She shook her head. What you need to understand is, it's not about you. They didn't really even think about humans. You were just in the way. She spoke quietly. He stared at her for a long moment and placed his hand on the pistol in his lap.
You're going to have to explain how you know that.
She nodded. I'll explain everything. Again, she thought for a while. The invaders are very intelligent, in a way that you, with your single brain, can't really understand. I'm not talking about their technology, the genetic engineering and faster-than-light drive. Humans could develop as much in time. They can control multiple limbs more precisely than you can control your hand. They can be any color or shape they choose. An invader, any cephalopod, has abilities that humans can't even conceive. Even pre-invasion cuttlefish and octopuses can do things you can't imagine. He thought about what she was saying.
We always suspected the invaders were cephalopods. No one has ever seen them, though.
Some have. She paused. I have. She waited for him to say something, but he remained quiet. They're not just cephalopods, they're directly related to the terrestrial species genetically.
You mean panspermia?
She looked surprised. He smiled bitterly.
I've neglected my academic studies. Somewhat since the invasion, but I remember things. There was even a theory that cephalopods had extraterrestrial origin.
His voice sounded more cultured and
less brutish than it had previously.
I didn't expect that you'd be educated.
A lot of fucking good that's done.
When he didn't go on, she said,
So, you have to understand that to the invaders, humans didn't even seem sentient, at least not as they knew it. All intelligent life in the galaxy is like them. Of course it is. They seeded it.
Again, she waited for him to respond. When he didn't, she went on. Humans seem more like automa that can perform clever tricks, like you would think of a virus. By the time they realized their era, it was almost too late.
Almost.
Once they realized that humans were more than they thought, they decided to study us, to learn about us, before we were all gone.
He looked at her, suddenly intense. And now we're getting to it.
I was an experiment, raised by invaders and exposed to captured humans, in the hope that I could form a bridge between the two, able to understand both species.
Do I want to know what happened to those captured humans?
She looked away. No. After a while, he asked her,
What are your plans for me?
Why do you think I have plans for you? I could have escaped them.
Could you have? You would seem to be a valuable tool for them to lose track of. And our meeting sure seems to be a perfect setup. You in distress, me, your rescuer. You, sympathetic and warning me of danger. Then, after you, my nurse and caretaker, maybe I'll tell you about the resistance.
When she didn't speak, he went on.
That attack should have killed me. They gave up pretty easily, didn't they? Leaving me crippled and unable to get away, stuck here with you. So I'd have to listen to your story. And then what? What do you want from me?
She reached out a hand and placed it on his good knee. There aren't many of us left. We may be the last ones.
He laughed bitterly. I'm supposed to ask if you mean we'd be like Adam and Eve, right? Except we can't be. Can we?
She stared at him, saying nothing. Then, why not?
Because you're not human, are you? You're an invader. You put on a good show, though.
She looked at him, choosing her next move, and then just gave up. What tipped you off?
Your skin flickered a bit when you were trying to sell me. Your scraped leg is still wet.
She looked at her leg, and it scabbed over.
You've been watching my reactions and adjusting your appearance to suit me. You've been getting more and more beautiful the longer we talk.
Eventually, I'd be your perfect woman. I can make you happy.
Your happy slave, you mean?
Is that so bad? You'd still be happy?
I think I'll pass on the role of slave to alien conquerors, thank you."
She leaned into him, and he drew back. "It's not like you really have a choice, you know."
Her limbs began to separate and become tentacles. He raised his pistol and she said,
"You must know that won't do anything to me."
He said,
"It's not for you."
He put the pistol in his mouth and pulled the trigger. He had the habit of survival, but the resistance had secrets that weren't his to share. Sirens, written by DragonRock007, Twitter handle @ThiefOfHearts. Jim was enjoying a cup of coffee one evening by a campfire at his favorite site down by the lake. When he saw a dark figure moving by the water, he called out as he stood to investigate. "Hello? Is there someone there?" But there was no reply. Continuing to walk, he saw something move behind a bush. He saw a woman peering out and asked, "Are you okay?" She stepped out into view. Jim's eyes now acclimated to the dark. He could see her in the moonlight. She was beautiful, with jet black hair and a perfect figure that clinged to her soaking wet smock. "Do you want to dry out by the fire?" Jim asked. She grabbed the bottom of her smock and, in one motion, pulled it over her hips and body and hung it on the branches of the bush. She moved closer to Jim and pressed her lips full onto his in a passionate kiss. What is your name?" he asked. "Leela," she replied in broken English. As they fell to the ground and made love by the edge of the lake, she was like no woman he had ever been with. She moved like a belly dancer in full motion. She wrapped her arms around his back and her legs around his waist. Jim was having trouble breathing and fought to break free. But oddly, Leela was much stronger than he was. Jim tried to scream, but had no breath left in his body. Leela put her lips to his ear and whispered, "This will be over soon. You are mine now." She held both of their bodies together as they rolled off the bank and into the lake. They both sank to the bottom, Jim's eyes wide open, screaming with terror, as the last sound he heard was his own ribcage and bones being crushed by Leela's deadly embrace. She grabbed his lifeless body and swam to the middle of the lake. There was a large tree stump with the protruding branch. She placed Jim's body against the branch and pushed it through his back. His blood churned in the water. She turned and let out a shriek that echoed through the lake. Within seconds, Bubbles moved towards her, and 20 more like her appeared.
This working curtains.
Those of you that are weakest should share the heart. Bon appetit, my children. My cat flew with Morana Air. She came back different. Written and edited by Mike Jesus Langer. Narrated by Dodge the Grave. The first time I met Lola was during a night out in university. I was drunkenly making my way back home with a poorly structured kebab, and she followed me. She was no bigger than my fist and looked as if she had been born inside of a drainage pipe. Yet, despite her size, she kept pace. She followed me all the way back to my dorm, eating up the trail of meat and salad that I left in my wake, all while bravely meowing into the night. I never intended to keep her. Being drunk, I could scarcely plan past the next couple of hours. That night, however, I knew that Lola wasn't going to spend the night sleeping on the street. The kitten was more than willing to hide in the pouch of my hoodie to get past the security guard. The hangover in the morning was brutal, but Lola's purring made it bearable. Lola spent the rest of the year being the worst kept secret in my student dorms, and then the next 3 years being the cuddly mascot of the flat I rented with my classmates. I got my degree and qualifications and went on to become an IB certified biology teacher. I'd hop around the international school circuit on 3-year contracts, and even though the culture and the continents changed, Lola remained a steady constant through my life. It didn't matter if it was hot or cold, or if the apartments were clean or covered in geckos. Lola was happy as long as there was someone to scratch her behind the ears. A lot of the spots where I taught provided pretty steep hazard pay, and I found myself in situations which I would rather have avoided, but Lola was the one constant in my years of traveling. She was a little piece of home I got to carry around. And nothing lasts forever, though. After 15 years of keeping me company, much of Lola's body had given out. She was blind in one eye and limp in one paw, and much of her day consisted of snoring on my lap. She would still meow with the same pitch of the kebab-hungry kitten, but, it was clear that Lola's time was running out. What made matters worse was that my 3-year contract was about to run out as well. After 3 years of teaching in the International School of Islamabad, I was set to start a 3-year stint in Prague. The day of flights and layovers would surely kill Lola. I couldn't bear the idea of her having her final moments in the cargo hold of a plane. Just the thought of leaving her behind, however, was just as bad. Lola was old and confused. I hated the idea of her going into the night without my company. Moving across the continent is hectic enough, but as the days counted down to my departure, all I could think about was the question of Lola. I had colleagues who offered to adopt her, and it was still possible to buy her a ticket, but each day I put off that decision. I lost sleep worrying over what would happen to my cat. I guess she felt it somehow. 3 days before my flight, after a night of complications, Lola eased my burden. She died. She died, and I held her paw, and I felt that last thud of life leave her. At the vet's office, they offered to dispose of her body, but I declined. Instead, I got Lola packed into an airtight plastic bag and took her home with me. I take her with me to Prague and get her cremated there. She could keep traveling with me. Turns out, however, that most conventional airlines aren't okay with transporting last-minute dead animals. My final 2 days in Islamabad were spent on the phone with every single airline that connect back to Prague. I repeated the story of her death over and over and over again until it had completely lost all meaning. No dice. No airline would transport her. It started to seem like I would have to leave my Lola behind in shrink wrap. But then, on the 25th page of Google, I found a company that was willing to transport Lola. They had no customer service number, nor could I find any mention of them on the internet besides their website. But their fact was clear. Question: can I transport dead animals on Morana Air flights? Answer: yes. An option to purchase a pet ticket popped up. I didn't have much of a choice. Even though the cat was dead, she still had to be transported inside of an animal container. When I dropped off Lola at the cargo depot, the airport guard seemed really uncomfortable. But aside from that, everything else went smoothly. I took my flight to London a few hours later and was in Prague by sunrise the next day. I took a couple of calls, but eventually I found a pet cremation place that spoke English and understood my situation. Lola was due to arrive the following afternoon, and the cremation place wasn't far from the airport. It started to feel like everything had been figured out. The problems didn't start until I picked Lola up from the airport. The smell was the first thing I noticed. Even from the hallway, I could smell the undeniable stench of rot. It didn't even occur to me that the smell could be tied to Lola's body. It wasn't until I got to the pickup point that I realized something was terribly wrong. The airport worker was young and uncomfortable. First thing she said when she saw me was, "We tried giving her a bath, but it didn't help." The words scarcely connected to my brain before the carrier box was brought out. 2 eyes stared at me from inside of the box, but I scarcely recognized them. The dark green plastic packaging Lola was wrapped in lay shredded in the corner of the cage. The cat I was looking at looked like a carbon copy of Lola, but I didn't recognize it. The eyes were different. I stood there in absolute shock, staring at the living cat in the box. I knew I had to say something to the attendant, but no words came to me. I remained awestruck by the sight inside the box until the cat broke me out of the spell. The creature moaned in a voice low with exhaustion. I tried explaining to the attendant that this wasn't my cat, that my cat was dead, yet she just nervously laughed. When I kept on insisting that what arrived in the box was not what was sent, she called her supervisor. The supervisor also nervously laughed for a bit, but then he said that my issue was with the airline. I was told to contact their customer service line. I was also asked to leave the premises with my pet. Throughout the whole argument, and through the whole bus ride back home, the cat kept on meowing from inside of the box. It sounded nothing like Lola. It sounded like some horrid demon just being exorcised and yelling, "No!" The cat meowed through the whole bus ride back, and everyone bunched up by the driver to escape the smell. When I let the cat out of the box in my apartment, it moved with a terrible swiftness. Lola calculated each step she took, but this creature rushed through the rooms like a guided missile. Once it scanned the room, it jumped atop my kitchen counter, stared into my soul, and proceeded to howl. I opened all the windows in the apartment and immediately set to finding the contact number for Morana Air customer support. As hard as I tried, however, I couldn't find any trace of them online. The whole way through my fruitless search, the cat kept on meowing. I tried to ignore the entire existence of the creature at first, but then it occurred to me that it might just be hungry. When the first couple of Google pages didn't return any results, I grabbed my coat and went downstairs to buy the cat some food. Getting out into the corner store helped me escape that terrible smell, but my clothes still stank like I rolled in a garbage heap. When I returned back to the apartment, I gagged. The smell had soaked into everything I owned. It won't eat. It won't drink. All the cat does is sit and stare and moan in those horrid low tones. It looks like my Lola. But I know better. I know that Lola drifted off to sleep on a chemical cocktail thousands of miles away. Whatever is sitting in front of me isn't her. It might be using her body, but it isn't her.
In a small pastoral town, the youth pay tribute with their flesh, by Kelness, featuring Magnetar, Goodnight Goosebumps, and The Devil's Interval. My college degree is about as useful as a broken foot. But I chose to study journalism, and the consequences are mine to accept. Still, in a time when award-winning reporting amounts to a listicle about 10 foods to avoid if you want to cut belly fat, it's hard to care about your craft. I started caring again when I got a strange, terrifying lead from my former classmate, Dave Jensen. A formal write-up will never get published, but I owe you an account of what happened. As far as I know, the seamstress is still out there, still searching for her next pound of flesh. Is my journalism degree any more useful now than it was before I heard about the seamstress? No. But maybe my legacy lies in creating this warning. Maybe, by writing this, I can save even one person from the gruesome fate of getting their skin unstitched from their body.
And did you hear about that kid who shoved his arm down a garbage disposal?
Dave had an eager way about him. An obsession with sensational breaking news.
A bad habit of setting a grim stage for the day before you had your morning coffee. It was 7:30 a.m. I just rolled out of bed.
Oh, you really have to stop doing that, Dave.
Stop doing what?
He was legitimately confused. I knew, thanks to the 3 warping dots that indicated he was typing. Deleting his message, typing again. But it dawned on him, and he sent a response.
Oh, right. I always forget.
Several years back, Dave had been the one to tell me about the ghost ship fire. It was an artist collective built inside a warehouse, a maze-like, makeshift hovel filled with flammable things like window and bed frames, railings, pianos, motorhomes, tapestries, sculptures, and even tree stumps. A spiral staircase was constructed from wood pallets that led up to a loft, into which more fuel was piled. It seemed that anything flammable the residents could find, they brought inside. The deadbeat proprietors of the place hosted an electronic house music concert, inviting dozens of people. No sprinkler system, no exits marked, no safety measures in place. The fire had an unknown cause. 36 people died. The morning it happened, I'd been making a bagel and cream cheese, which was interrupted by Dave calling to break the brutal news. Now, he was back at it again. I took the opportunity to remind him of my boundaries. Look, as a general rule, I don't want to hear about kids putting their arms down garbage disposals before 9 o'clock.
Fair. But it's in your neck of the woods. Maybe this'll be your big break.
He piqued my interest, so I called him.
It's the weirdest fucking thing,
said Dave. His words buzzed through the line. He swore like a sailor.
I mean, fucking Christ. Shoving your arm down a garbage disposal? The kid was a pitcher on the high school baseball team. Kyler Coleman is his name. The big leagues were scouting him, apparently. And it was his goddamn throwing arm.
My stomach lurched. What else have you heard?
Only that it's not the first time.
He put his other arm down a garbage disposal too?
No. I meant he's not the first kid to maim himself. It's happened to 11 other kids, too. At least according to what I've found so far. All of them between the ages of 12 and 17. Different body parts. Different methods of violence.
I opened my laptop.
The people in that town, they're calling it an epidemic.
Epidemic? Epidemic was one of those words you knew, even if you didn't have an exact definition. But I typed it in to remind myself. A widespread occurrence of an infectious disease in a community at a particular time. I don't get it. It's a disease?
An infection of the mind. That's what someone called it. No one is taking the kids seriously, just writing it off as them being nuts. Sending them to the nut house for a bit, then pushing it under the rug.
How about the police?
From what I can tell, they did the bare minimum. The town is called, if you want to learn more.
I didn't recognize the name. But after typing it into Google, I saw that it was about 45 minutes outside the city. I'm going, I said.
Convinced already, huh?
Yeah. I'm not interested in repackaging Wikipedia articles on Medium anymore. Maybe it'll be my big story. Who knows? I should get ready. I stood up and made my way toward the shower. Thanks for the lead, Dave.
No problem,
he said.
Look, Kate, I know you're a lone wolf, but be careful. This whole thing... fucking freaky, man. The kids are chalking it up to, for lack of a better fucking word, an urban legend.
An urban legend?
They call her seamstress. They remove their flesh for her in various ways, offering it as a tribute. That way, the thinking goes, she won't come for the rest of your family.
My stomach lurched again. Too much information. Too damn early in the morning.
Just the facts.
Said Dave.
But I thought you should know more about the anecdotal stuff. Yo, this shit is fucking wild.
Cold calling, in my experience, is almost always a recipe for disaster. People don't like Jehovah's Witnesses knocking on their door with the latest issue of The Watchtower. They don't like snooping amateur journalists either. If Kyler Coleman's parents had been home, I probably would have been read the riot act and told to get off their porch. But it was just him. I rang the doorbell, and he answered. He was a bit over 6 feet tall, athletic looking, black buzz cut. Everything was intact aside from his amputated right arm. I knew it was him at once. Hi there. Are you Kyler?
Who's asking?
He looked skittish. It didn't match up with his broad-chestedness, his confident posture. In another lifetime, he would still be a carefree 17-year-old star athlete. Whatever caused him to stick his arm down a garbage disposal had changed him forever. My name is Kate Hunter, I said. I run an online blog.
You're a reporter?
A freelancer. Kyler glanced down at his missing arm.
I already told the cops what happened.
Kyler looked up and down the street. He was worried, almost paralyzed by anxiety. It didn't add up. It was a suburban street lined with cookie-cutter houses, white picket fences, and carefully sculpted front lawns. The birds were chirping. The sun was out. But Kyler's expression made it seem like we were standing in the middle of a war zone.
Come in before anyone sees us,
he said. He closed the door behind me and led me to the living room. The house was split level, extensively remodeled. Kyla's parents made a good amount of money, or at least they spent like they did. The fancy furniture made that blatantly obvious.
Do you want water or anything?
He asked. Sure, water would be great. He went to the kitchen. I heard the sound of the ice dispenser and the faucet. I set up my things. Kyler came back and handed me the glass. Then he dropped onto the cloud-like couch, the overstuffed cushions wheezing beneath his large athletic frame. He looked exhausted. It didn't fit a person as young as him. God willing, he had 60 or 70 more years of life to look forward to.
I'll talk to you,
he said, sitting up.
But you have to promise me you won't try to change her mind.
Whose mind?
Sarah Felton,
he said.
She has to offer tribute. It's too late now.
Sarah Felton? Offered tribute? I don't think I follow.
Sarah is next on the list. The seamstress needs a pound of flesh from her. It's either 1 pound or...
He paused, his eyes focusing on something I couldn't see.
Or however much the skin of Sarah's entire family weighs.
Kyler turned back to me, grave sincerity in his expression.
Don't try to stop her. Sarah is already marked, so it's too late. But maybe if you do a write-up or something, I don't know. Maybe others won't have to suffer.
It was a lot to take in. So I decided to do what I did best. I listened. Do you mind if I record this, Kyler?
No. You definitely should.
I set down my phone and started recording. If you wouldn't mind, just say once more that I have your consent to record our conversation.
You do. I mean, you have my permission.
Okay. Why don't you tell...
It all started last summer. Looking out my window, I saw her in the yard. It was a Thursday. The seamstress, there she was, standing in the moonlight, smiling that big fucking ugly smile of hers.
Who is the seamstress? I asked.
A monster. If she marks you, you have to act fast. Within 48 hours, you have to make your tribute and leave it in the spot where you saw her.
What does she look like? I asked.
Like a nightmare. You know Alice in Wonderland? The Cheshire Cat?
I did. But I was older than Kyler. I didn't know kids still read Lewis Carroll or looked at his psychedelic drawings,
The only reason I heard about the Cheshire Cat
said Kyler, as if reading my mind.
is because that's what her smile looks like. The seamstress is pretty normal looking until she opens her mouth. Beautiful even, which is why we trust her at first. She has pale blonde hair, pale as moonlight, pale skin to match. Her eyes glow like twin stars. But when she opens her mouth,
I waited for Kyler to finish his next words, to avoid muddying them with my interpretation.
her teeth are needles. Not like needles, actual needles. Thousands and thousands of them. She sews flesh with her mouth.
I took a drink of the water Kyler had given me. The crispness of it brought me back to reality. I looked at what remained of Kyler's arm, wondering more about how he'd lost it.
You should have seen my coach.
Kyler said, studying the hand and fingers that weren't there.
He was sobbing. You were going to the MLB. You had such a bright future. But the adults don't realize it isn't a choice. If the seamstress shows up outside your house at night, you better give her your flesh within 2 days. 48 hours. Like I said, you have to pay tribute, or she takes your whole fucking family.
I don't mean to be insensitive, but how do you know your family will be taken if you don't pay tribute?
Because Sam Billingsley,
What happened to Sam?
he got marked. He was one of the first, but he called bullshit. Thought we were hurting ourselves for no reason.
Kyler drew a deep breath. Then he grabbed my water and took a drink, letting it sit in his mouth for a moment before swallowing.
I grew up with Sam. I knew his family, and the seamstress skinned them all like it was nothing. And it was for nothing, too, because Sam blew his head off with his dad's shotgun a few weeks later.
The back of my neck began itching suddenly, as though an insect had skittered across it. I clapped my hand to it. Nothing there. Kyler was watching me, so I pretended to massage the muscles, then cleared my throat. Can you tell me more about the night you lost your arm?
My parents go to bed early, around 9. My little brother does also. It had almost been 2 days by then. I put it off as long as I could, but I saw the seamstress outside both nights, so I knew I had to be brave. And I saw the stitch marks on my right forearm.
The stitch marks?
Yeah. Bone white, like a scar drawn in chalk. 1 line, 3 others crossing through it. It's her sign. The seamstress puts it on whatever body part she wants. Then you have to take care of the rest. That night, I went downstairs. I thought about what I could use. This kid in my grade, Phil Thomas, used his dad's bandsaw to cut off his foot. This girl, Lindsay Mayfield, she almost ran out of time, didn't know what to use, so she cut out a big chunk of her stomach with her mom's cooking scissors. It ended up being enough, and the seamstress left her family alone. But Lindsay has to shit into a bag now.
I sat in silence, completely stunned. Kyler was desensitized.
Lindsay went too deep, fucked up her guts. Hence, the bag.
Tell me more about what happened to you, I said, wanting more than anything to shift the subject away from Lindsay Mayfield.
I almost ran out of time, too. But right as the sun started coming up, I thought of my mom and my dad and my brother, about wanting them to be safe, and I went through with it. I grabbed a huge bottle of hydrogen peroxide. My mom had always used it to clean scratches and stuff. Then I turned on the disposal and jammed my arm down into it, pouring in hydrogen peroxide with my free hand. I'd never felt anything so painful, but I fought back the urge to stop and kept pressing down until I hit the elbow joint. Right near the end, my mom came downstairs, hearing the sound of screaming and the grinding disposal. She fainted. It was lucky because when my dad came down, he went to her, rather than trying to stop me. I got a trash bag from under the sink where we kept them, and reached into the drain, pulling out what was left of my arm. I remember seeing the peroxide bubbling up from it, frothing over, spilling through my fingers and onto the ground. I got most of it into the bag, stumbled outside, and left it near where the seamstress had been standing.
As unsettled as I was also captivated. I never heard anything like this. Kyler's description of the seamstress and his conviction that she existed was terrifying.
When I woke up, I was in a hospital. My arm was gone. They cauterized the stump. They said I was lucky I didn't bleed to death. But my family was safe. It was worth it.
Outside, a car pulled into the driveway.
You should go. My dad's gonna be pissed when he finds out you're interviewing me.
I'm so sorry for what happened to you, Kyler. He shook his head.
Don't be. It sucks before, and it sucks while it's happening. But then the seamstress fucks off and goes to bother someone else. I'm thankful, honestly. Don't feel sorry for me. It's Sarah Felton you should feel sorry for.
The front door opened. Kyler's dad was standing there. He looked furious. I wondered how many aspiring journalists like me had come to interview his son. He knew who I was and why I'd come, even at a glance.
Please leave,
he said. And I did. Kyler snuck through the side door of his house and ran out to meet me just as I started up my car.
Remember, about Sarah, don't try to stop her. Just leave, do your write-up, warn people about this, and tell the truth. But Sarah has to pay tribute. The seamstress already marked her.
How do you know?
We have a Discord for survivors and for people who the seamstress has marked. Sarah was marked a day and a half ago. We coached her, told her she doesn't have a choice. She has to do it tonight, or her whole family dies.
I resolved to find out where she lived.
You're not listening to me. If you try and stop her, you're responsible for her whole fucking family dying.
I put the car in reverse. Kyler started hyperventilating. He held on as long as he could, but eventually lost his grip, doing a sad pirouette in the driveway as he spun to the ground. He'd begun sobbing. He looked utterly helpless. And I hated myself for not doing him the courtesy of promising that I'd leave town, but I couldn't. I had to stop Sarah. The kids were too young to continue maiming themselves. As I drove away, I saw that Kyler's dad had come out. He was attempting to hug his son, to pull him to his feet. Kyler pushed him back weakly with his remaining hand. His dad began sobbing as well. I spent the rest of the day hunting down Sarah's address. I searched social media feeds. I found her profile, saw her in pictures with her friends, but I couldn't find an address. Morning led to afternoon. Afternoon fell toward twilight. I watched the sun creep across the sky toward the western hills on the town's outskirts as time ticked by. Night wasn't far off. As far as I knew, Sarah was already preparing to strip the flesh from whatever body part the seamstress had marked. I went to a diner, ordered a coffee to fight back against my exhaustion, and called Dave. Dave, the kids, they're hurting themselves and they think the seamstress is after them. The urban legend you mentioned before, it's freaking insane.
Slow down, Kate.
Shut up and listen, Dave. I need your help. A girl. Her name is, Sarah Felton. All I have is my fucking phone and no clue how to find out where she lives.
I'm at my computer. Hold on.
I picked up my coffee, my hand shaking, the hot liquid spilling out of the cup and running down my arm. Coffee was the last thing I needed, but I had to stay awake, to stay alert, to save Sarah. Anything? I asked. People around the diner had begun to take notice of me. A man sitting at the bar, a waitress who just brought him a burger and fries, the line cook, staring out from beneath the rectangular order window in the kitchen on the other side.
James and Marcia Felton. Daughter, Sarah, 15 years old.
Dave was the best investigative reporter I knew. Just as unemployable as I was, but exceptionally skilled at finding things. I had no idea how he found Sarah, and I didn't care. Any other Feltons in...
Not that I can see. Look, take a deep breath, Kate. If the girl's in trouble, it's not going to help if you smash through her living room window.
I listened. I tried to breathe normally, to calm my frayed nerves. I pushed the coffee cup away and drank my water instead. Then I looked out the window. The amber magic hour light was gone. Darkness was descending. I raised my hand and snapped at the waitress. She came over.
Don't get pushy, miss, she said. Can I get my check, please? For a $2 coffee?
I pulled out a 20 and left it on the table, then rushed out.
Still with me, Kate?
I'd forgotten that Dave was on the line. Yeah, I said. Text me the address. I'm heading over. Sarah Felton's house was too goddamn far away. 25 minutes, according to Google Maps. Far on the other side of town. I drove faster, hoping I wouldn't get pulled over. I swerved past cars that were driving too slow and through yellow to red lights. Everything seemed to stand in my way, but I fought against each roadblock, keeping the girl at the front of my mind. After pulling onto a winding, private road, I saw it. A tall, 3-story Victorian mansion. Remembering what Dave said about not smashing through the living room window, I slowed down and parked near the end of the driveway. I ran along in the darkness. I remembered the seamstress, her mouth made of needles, always watching her next mark. But I couldn't see anyone in the shadows. It was just me and the jackhammer feeling of my heart doing its best to burst through my chest. I got to the front door. I straightened my clothes, wiped the sweat from my face. Then I rang the doorbell. I looked down at my watch. 7:01 p.m. Night had arrived. I rang the doorbell again, and a minute later, a man answered. He scanned me with his eyes.
Can I help you?
Hi there. Is Sarah home?
The man, Sarah's dad, raised an eyebrow. My name is Kate Hunter, I said. I'm a journalist.
Why do you want to talk to Sarah?
I need to warn her, to stop her. She's going to hurt herself tonight. His expression turned serious.
I think you'd better go.
Without stopping to think, I pushed past him and ran inside. He grabbed my shirt, stopping me, pulling me back toward him. I ripped away, and my shirt sleeve tore off, staying in his hand.
What the hell is wrong with you?
He yelled.
Marcia, call the police.
I didn't stop. I kept running. I circled through the kitchen, the TV room, another fancy lounge area, its back wall lined with expensive bottles of booze. But there was no sign of a 15-year-old girl. Sarah's dad chased me through the house, gaining on me, understanding the layout better than I did. I heard the sound of a door slamming shut overhead. I ran back to the entryway, from which a massive staircase led up to the second floor. Sarah's dad clutched at my heels. I heard the sound of her mom frantically yelling into the phone, telling the police about a crazy woman who'd broken into their house. I reached the second floor hallway. Looking left and right, I saw that the doors were all open. I made my way to the third floor. At the end of the hallway, I saw a closed door, a sliver of light shining from beneath it. I ran toward it and grabbed the knob. Locked. Sarah's dad finally caught up to me, grabbing my arm and yanking me back.
What the hell is wrong with you?
The door,
I said.
it's locked. Listen, send me to jail after this. I don't care. But if you have any love for your daughter, you'll help me.
He tried the knob. It wouldn't budge. He began banging on the wood. I heard the sound of crying on the other side.
It's too late. I'm sorry. She's already here.
Sarah, hold on. We can help you,
I said. The sound of a foot meeting wood cut off my words. Sarah's dad had lifted his leg, attempting to kick down the door, again and again. Finally, the door smashed off its hinges, revealing Sarah. She was standing near her open window. As I went into the room, she started making her way out onto the roof. I noticed that one end of a rope was attached to her leg. The other was attached to something outside. I went after her. Sarah had reached the edge of the roof. I saw that the rope was attached to a thick tree branch, 3 feet in diameter. The tree was massive, as old as the property, 50 feet tall at least. I swayed, realizing how high up we were. Sarah, please, we can get you help.
She's here.
Sarah sobbed.
I told you it's too late.
She crept closer to the edge of the roof.
Sarah!
Her mom and dad, looking out from her bedroom window, both of them pleading together.
Honey, please come back inside. Come away from the edge.
I saw the look of determination in Sarah's eyes. There was no going back. I went closer, almost reaching her until the sight of something stopped me. I saw a woman standing in the moonlight at the base of the old-growth tree. Her blonde hair and skin were just as silvery and pale as the moon. Her eyes, like Kyler Coleman said, glowed like twin stars. She opened her mouth. A Cheshire cat smile. Even at a distance, my vision seemed to zoom in. The seamstress's teeth were needles, thousands of them, like the action of a sewing machine. They rose and fell, looking for something to stitch.
Do you see?
Asked Sarah.
I don't have any choice.
Wait!
But it was too late. Sarah had already stepped off the edge of the roof, plummeting toward the ground 40 feet below. The darkness swallowed her. I heard a snapping noise, a cry of pain, and a grunt. The tree branch creaked under the strain of Sarah's body hitting the edge of the rope. I ran past Sarah's parents, down the stairs and outside. I followed the sound of groaning, letting it lead me through the darkness. Then I saw her. Sarah was lying on the ground, her body twisted unnaturally. The first thing I saw was her collarbone. It was broken. It stuck out through her neck at a diagonal 45-degree angle. I went to her. Bending down, I saw the gleaming ball of her hip joint. Her leg was gone, torn away from her body. But the thing that terrified me most wasn't Sarah's mangled body or her non-existent leg. It was the noose, swaying in the night breeze. A few shreds of flesh hanging from it like witch hair moss. There was no leg to speak of.
Do you?
Sarah groaned.
Do you see it?
I followed Sarah's eyes. Backing away into the darkness was the seamstress. She seemed to be chewing on Sarah's severed leg, her needle teeth running up and down it, exploring the flesh, tasting it, savoring it, unstitching it from the bone beneath. The next several hours passed in a blur. The paramedics came. They saved Sarah's life. I overheard them talking about how she broke her back, that she couldn't move her remaining leg. Her parents clutched each other, wrapped in blankets provided by the EMTs. The cops cuffed me, put me in a cruiser, and drove to the station. But my stay was short. The next morning, Dave picked me up, having driven the whole night after I called him. In the time since, I've followed Sarah's case. News cycles came and went. Sarah's accident had paralyzed her from the waist down. Not long after being admitted to a psych ward, she was released and went home to live with her parents. They could have pressed charges. There was speculation that some insane amateur journalist had pushed Sarah from the 3rd floor of her home. But surprisingly, Sarah's parents came to my defense, saying that I'd only tried to help her. I think about what happened to Sarah every night when the moon comes up. I think about the kids in that small pastoral town, wondering if the seamstress has finally satisfied her hunger. Sarah was the last victim. But looking out my window at night, I see that Cheshire cat smile. In the moonlight, I see a mouthful of needles, rising and falling, rising and falling, starving for a fabric of human flesh.